All right, so we got tomato fillets, we got tomato concassé, we got peeled Roma tomatoes, we got halved cherry tomatoes, we got beefsteak tomato slices, and we've got beefsteak tomato chunks. And I think that's most of the things you can do with a tomato. Hey everyone, how's it going? Today we're going to be cutting some tomatoes. All right, so I got 3 different types of tomatoes here. They're beefsteak tomatoes, Roma tomatoes, and then the little cherry tomatoes. Beefsteak tomatoes, these are sort of your big everyday tomatoes, the kind that you're gonna slice and put into sandwiches, stuff like that. In general, with tomatoes, unless you're getting them during the peak of tomato season, maybe you're getting them from your backyard or your neighbor's backyard, or maybe you're getting them from the farmer's market. In general, the smaller the tomato you get, the tastier it's going to be in the off season when you're buying them from the supermarket. The reason for that is because of the square cube law. So the square cube law basically states that as an object gets bigger in size, its surface area, the part that it's resting on, will increase by a square, by a factor of 2, but its volume, and therefore its mass, will increase by a factor of 3. Therefore, the bigger an object is, the more weight you're going to be putting on the surface of it. So a big tomato like this is more likely to get crushed under its own weight. It's the same reason why dinosaurs could only get so big and why whales can get really big, because they live in the ocean. But a big tomato is going to get crushed under its own weight, whereas a small tomato will not. And therefore, when they harvest big tomatoes, they harvest them underripe. So most of the time when you're getting a tomato like this from the supermarket, it was picked when it was green, and then in transit, it's going to be gassed with a gas called ethylene. It's a gas that's naturally produced by ripening fruit, but it's what triggers a tomato to turn red and sort of finishing the ripening process. However, the flavor that you get out of a tomato that's been ripened like that is never going to be as good as the flavor you get from a tomato that's ripened completely on the vine. Whereas small tomatoes like this, they can be picked when they are completely red or when they're almost completely ripe, because they don't get crushed under their own weight. So usually in the off season when I'm buying tomatoes, I tend to prefer buying smaller tomatoes. That said, I do think there is something to be said for even an off-season beefsteak tomato. It adds a little bit of acidity, a little bit of crunch, sometimes even to a sandwich, to a BLT, something like that. In any case, when you get tomatoes, when you store them, the best way to store them is to make sure that they're upside down. And the reason is because the area around here where the vine was, where the vine attaches to the fruit, you're going to start losing moisture through that area. And I did a test on this way back when I was working at Cooks Illustrated, maybe, 15 years ago. But we tried storing tomatoes upright like this, and we stored them down like this. Upright, they start to shrivel up within a few days. Down like that, they'll stay fresh for a week, maybe a week and a half. The other thing you can do if you want, we tried testing this also. You can put a little piece of tape over here, and that actually keeps the tomatoes from losing their moisture as well. But putting them upside down. Another question that often comes up is whether you should put tomatoes in the fridge or not. Some people will say never ever put tomatoes in the fridge. The reason being that there is a change that occurs in the texture and the flavor of a tomato that is irreversible once they've been put in the fridge. However, when you're buying tomatoes from the supermarket like this, they have already been refrigerated at some point down the line. So that change has already occurred, which is why supermarket tomatoes they sometimes have a mealy texture and they don't ever taste real great. It's because they've already been refrigerated. So putting a supermarket tomato in the fridge is actually not gonna really harm it, and it will extend its shelf life by quite a few days. You just wanna make sure that it comes back up to room temperature if you're gonna serve it, if you're gonna eat it in a salad. Even tomatoes that you buy from the farmer's market or tomatoes that you buy, that you grow yourself, sometimes it's worth refrigerating those as well. We did a whole bunch of tests on this at Serious Eats. My colleague Daniel Gritzer and I did a bi-coastal tomato test where we tested storing tomatoes in the fridge for various lengths of times. And what we found is that if your tomato is really ripe, if you're gonna not eat it immediately and you're gonna eat it a couple days later, if it's really ripe and you leave it on the counter, it'll actually over-ripen and start to lose flavor. Whereas if you put it in the fridge, that flavor will get preserved. So you do lose a little bit of the texture, you lose a little bit of flavor in the fridge, but the flavor and texture actually come out better than an over-ripe tomato does. So it really depends on the context. So in general, if the best advice I can give is that if you buy a tomato from the farmer's market or you get it off the vine in your own backyard, eat it immediately. And if you're not gonna eat it immediately and it's already very ripe, then go ahead and put it in the fridge and make sure that you just let it come back up to room temperature before you start serving it. All right, so tomatoes, various ways to peel them. I'm gonna start by showing you how to peel Roma tomatoes, which are the ones that you're gonna most likely be peeling most often because these are sauce tomatoes. So Roma tomatoes are very high in pectin, which means that they make a really good sauce. They make a sauce that gets thick and clings to your pasta really nicely. So what I just did was I cut a little X in the base of it here, you see? Just a little X. And what that's going to do is it's going to give a place for the skin to start peeling off. All right, so we cut an X in each one of them. Now we're going to drop them into a pot of boiling water. I'll do 3 of them right now because I'll show you another way that you can do these other 2. We're going to let those just cook in the boiling water just for a few seconds, maybe about 30 seconds to a minute. And what happens here is that the air spaces and the water vapor that's trapped underneath that skin is going to start to expand, and that's going to push the skin right off the edge of the tomato. So you can see already this one's starting to peel off on its own. We're going to let that go just to make sure that the skin is kind of puffing away from the tomato surface all the way around the tomato. All right. And then to prevent it from overcooking, we're going to drop it into an ice bath. Now, the reason you might want to get rid of a tomato skin, it's like, why do you want to get rid of a tomato skin? Tomato skins are generally pretty tender. Really, it's just a matter of your tomato sauce, making sure if you're going to make a sauce, if you're going to make a braise, if you're going to make a stew, some people don't like that texture of the tomato skin in the finished sauce, that sort of papery texture. All right, so we're going to get the tomatoes into our ice bath. And then once they're chilled, you can kind of just rub the skins right off with your hands like that, you see? They come right off. The other way that you can get rid of tomato skins, which is even easier, is if you're going to be making a sauce out of these tomatoes, you just stew them, you cook them in a pot, and then you run them through a food mill. So, a thing that's going to make a passata, that's going to make a puree out of them, but it's also going to strain out all the skins. So that's a much easier way to do it if you happen to have a food mill. But this way is easy enough. If you're only doing, so that's the way I would do it if I was, say, I had a big batch of tomatoes off of my plant, or if I was working in a restaurant where I'm going to be making a ton of sauce. If you only want to do a couple tomatoes at a time, like say a half dozen tomatoes, a real easy way to do it is to instead of bringing a pot of water to a boil, you can do them directly over a burner like this, or if you happen to have like a torch, you just put them on like an aluminum tray and torch them, and the skins very similarly are going to kind of pop. You can actually even see it. I don't know if you can zoom in real close and watch the skin kind of peeling itself away from the side of the tomato. This is how I would do my tomato if I was going to say, make like a batch of salsa or something like that, like a roasted tomato salsa. I would do it like this because I'm not going to be doing a ton of tomatoes. I'm just going to be making a smaller batch, and it'll also give you a little bit of a hint of that kind of charred flavor from the smoky skin. And of course, the longer you hold it on there, the more of that flavor you're going to get. All right. So same exact process. You can then dump it in the ice bath the same way. And then the skins should peel right off, just like that. All right. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to cut these tomatoes into a couple different shapes. So with a Roma tomato like this, typically if I'm going to be making sauce, I don't necessarily want the seeds in there. I know some people really like the flavor of the seeds. I find that the seeds, when you put them in a sauce especially, can have a sort of distracting texture. So I don't necessarily like to have the seeds. So what I do is I cut my tomatoes into quarters like this. And then what I'll do is I will actually sort of fillet the middle part out. So I get this, the white bit of the core, the green bit off the end, and then the seeds. And I just set those aside. And so you end up with these tomato fillets that will turn into a real nice smooth sauce, if that's what you want. Of course, you don't have to do that. If you want to, there's nothing wrong with leaving the seeds in there, having a little bit of that sort of seedy texture. Some people will also tell you that the seeds have more flavor than the flesh does, and that might be true. They will offer sort of a different set of flavors than you have in the flesh. I tend to find the flavor of just the flesh to be a little bit cleaner for a tomato sauce. So the shape, these would be tomato fillets. You can cut them into strips. If you're a fancy and French, you can then cut those strips. You cut these fillets into strips like that, and then you turn them 90 degrees, and you cut them into little dice, and that's called a tomato concassé, right? Which are these little tomato cubes. You would do those in a Provençal dish in a fancy French restaurant, all right? So fillets, concassé. And then let's leave these over here. All right. Obviously, if you're going to be, let's say you're making a you're making a BLT, and you just want to slice a tomato, real sharp knife, hold your tomato sideways like this. You can use the tip of your knife to cut out the stem like that if you want. And then you're going to just go slices like this. And the less sawing you do, generally the better for vegetables, because it mangles them a little bit less. Okay, real simple tomato slices. And finally, for a beefsteak or a Roma tomato, the other shape you can obviously do. I don't even know if anyone really needs to see this, how to cut a tomato into wedges for like a salad. So you can cut them into quarters like this. You get your wedges like that, or you can cut them into bigger chunks like that. Tomatoes, slices, wedges, concassé, fillets. And now let's move on to our cherry tomatoes. So cherry tomatoes, these are typically what I'm going to be buying if I'm buying tomatoes in the winter. I would buy these whether I'm making a sauce or whether I'm using them in a salad. They just have much better flavor than the bigger tomatoes in the winter. For a tomato sauce, I've got a couple of recipes I can link to, but I actually will use the cherry tomatoes whole. I'll just throw them straight in, I'll saute some garlic in olive oil in a pot. I'll throw my cherry tomatoes in there whole and kind of let them burst on their own. If you want to put them into a salad or something like that, you can, of course, take them one at a time and kind of straddle your fingers over them like this and split them. A much easier way to do it, though, is if you take a lid like this, you stick your tomatoes in there, okay? And you put a second lid on top, and then you take your knife and just cut through. All right, we just got all those tomatoes split in half at once. Lena just asked a good question, which was, if I'm going to be making a tomato sauce and it's the off season, am I going to be buying canned tomatoes or will I be buying fresh tomatoes? I will almost always be buying canned tomatoes. So canned tomatoes are made with tomatoes that were allowed to fully ripen on the vine, even beyond what you're going to typically get in a farmer's market. And they're made usually with tomatoes that are specifically grown for sauces. So specific types of Roma tomatoes. It could be something like a San Marzano. Yeah, I'm almost always going to buy a canned tomato if I'm going to be making a really sort of, if I want a really rich tomato sauce with a lot of tomato flavor. Canned tomatoes are almost always the way to go. The exception would be in the height of summer when you can get really, really great vine ripened tomatoes. But in the winter, always going to be canned tomatoes. And even in the summer, most of the time a sauce is going to be canned tomatoes. All right, so we got tomato fillets, we got tomato concassé, we got peeled plum Roma tomatoes, we got halved cherry tomatoes, we got beefsteak tomato slices, and we've got beefsteak tomato chunks. And I think that's most of the things you can do with a tomato. All right, guys, gals, and non-binary pals, we'll be back with more knife skills some other time. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed the video. You can find the full article and recipe along with bonus content and my newsletter for free on my Patreon. Don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel for more videos like this, or my alternate channel, Kenji Lopez Main, for my dining content. And follow me on Instagram at Kenji López-Alt for daily updates. You can also get signed and personalized copies of any of my books. That's The Food Lab, The Walk, or my children's book, Every Night is Pizza Night, shipped from Book Larder here in Seattle. Find the links to all of this, as well as all of the tools I used in today's video, in the description below. Thanks.